Most of us grew up probably believing that success will solve our problems. Better job, more money, more opportunities, more recognition. We imagine success adding something to our lives. And sometimes it does. But very few of us stop to ask a different question. What happens after success arrives? Not to our careers, to us. Because history is filled with people who reached the top only to discover that success came with a price they never expected to pay. Hollywood knows that story well. Extraordinary careers, extraordinary talent, and sometimes extraordinary personal struggles. Which is why one career caught my attention. Not because it's perfect, not because it's free from hardship, but because from the outside looking in, it seems to follow a different path. For more than 3 decades, Keanu Reeves has remained one of Hollywood's enduring leading actors. From Bill and Ted, to Speed, to The Matrix, to John Wick, his career has continued to evolve across generations. Most actors become closely identified with one defining role. Keanu Reeves kept creating another. That's rare, but it's not the most interesting part of his story. The interesting part isn't how famous he became. It's the life that appears to have developed alongside that success. And that's where I want to be careful, because none of us truly knows what happens inside another person's mind. We can read interviews, we can watch careers unfold, we can observe decisions, but we should never mistake observation for certainty. So instead of asking, why is Keanu Reeves different? I'd rather ask a better question. What can we actually observe? Not internet myths, not celebrity gossip, not stories that became bigger every time they were repeated. Just the choices, the habits, and the patterns that keep appearing over time. Because sometimes the patterns tell us more than any single moment ever could. One of the first things I noticed was that acting never appeared to become the only meaningful part of Keanu's life. Yes, he became one of Hollywood's biggest stars, but over the years, he kept returning to music. He kept performing with Dogstar. He co-founded Arch Motorcycle. He explored writing, creative collaborations, projects that seemed to matter to him, whether they generated headlines or not. Now, does any of that prove why his career unfolded the way it did? No, I don't think so. But it does invite an interesting question. When one part of your life becomes extraordinarily successful, what happens if it isn't the only meaningful part of your life? The question has nothing to do with Hollywood. It has everything to do with us. Because somewhere along the way, we'll all face the same temptation to allow one part of our lives to quietly become the whole story. Maybe that's where our investigation really should begin. So what made Keanu Reeves different? I don't think that's a question anyone can answer with certainty, but I do think it's a question worth investigating. Not by trying to read his mind, not by repeating internet stories, but by paying attention to the choices we can actually observe. And one pattern begins to emerge almost immediately. He keeps returning to the work itself, the collaboration, the story, the process of creating something with other people. He doesn't describe acting as something he conquered. He describes it as something he's still learning. That's an interesting way to think about work, because there are 2 very different ways to build a career. One asks, how can I prove myself? The other asks, how can I keep getting better? Those questions may sound similar, but they lead to very different lives. If every project is about proving your worth, every setback begins to feel personal. That doesn't mean one approach is right and the other is wrong. It simply means the question you're asking yourself may shape the career you build. And that's another pattern worth noticing. As Keanu's success grew, his curiosity didn't seem to disappear. He continued returning to music. He continued investing time in motorcycles and craftsmanship. He continued looking for creative work that seemed to interest him. Those aren't isolated moments. They appear consistently over decades. But they do invite another question. What happens when your career grows and the rest of your life grows with it? Because the opposite can happen too. Sometimes success expands our world. Sometimes it slowly narrows it. One opportunity becomes another, then another. Almost everything begins revolving around one role, one title, one identity. Not because we planned it, because it happened gradually. And that's something worth paying attention to. Because I don't think people usually lose themselves all at once. I think it happens quietly, one decision at a time, one season at a time, one promotion at a time, one success at a time. And that's what keeps drawing me back to Keanu Reeves. Not because I think he discovered some secret, but because over more than 3 decades, we can observe someone who appears to have kept investing in more than one meaningful part of his life. But perhaps that's the real value of studying extraordinary lives. Not to imitate them, not to place them up on a pedestal, but to notice patterns and ask whether they might help us think more carefully about the lives we're building for ourselves. Because maybe the real question isn't, how do I become successful? Maybe it's, who am I becoming while I pursue success? Success does have a way of changing what we pay attention to. Early in our careers, we often focus on becoming good enough. Later, it's easy to become focused on staying successful. Those aren't the same thing. One is driven by growth. The others can quietly become driven by fear. Fear of losing what we've built. Fear of disappointing people. Fear of no longer being relevant. Hollywood isn't the only place that happens. It happens in classrooms, boardrooms, small businesses, hospitals, construction sites, everywhere. Success changes the questions we ask ourselves. Instead of asking, what can I learn? We begin asking, what do I have to protect? Maybe that's one of the quiet turning points in a career. Not because success changed us overnight, but because success slowly changed what we're paying attention to. When I look at Keanu Reeves' career, I don't see someone who avoided pressure. No one does. What interests me is something else. Across decades, he appears to have continued investing in more than one meaningful part of his life. I'm not suggesting those interests explain everything. I'm suggesting they remind us of something we often forget. A meaningful life usually isn't built on one foundation. When everything depends on one role, one title, one identity, life becomes fragile. Let me ask you something. If tomorrow morning your job disappeared, your title changed, or your career took an unexpected turn, what parts of you would still remain? Would there still be someone who loves learning, someone who enjoys creating, someone who invests in friendships, someone who has interests beyond work? Or have those parts quietly faded without you ever meaning for that to happen? Those aren't easy questions, but they may be important ones. Because I don't think people usually wake up one day and decide to lose themselves. I think it happens quietly, one season at a time, one responsibility at a time, one success at a time, until eventually work stops being something we do and quietly becomes who we believe we are. Maybe that's why Keanu Reeves' story resonates with so many people. Perhaps it's because from everything we can observe, he seems to have kept returning to the same idea. The work matters, the craft matters, the people matter, and life continues beyond the spotlight. Whether that's the reason his journey feels different, I can't say, but I do think it's worth paying attention to, because every extraordinary life leaves clues, not instructions, clues. And sometimes those clues help us ask better questions about our own lives. Maybe that's the lesson, not just from Keanu Reeves, but from every extraordinary life we'll explore together. Because every success asks something from us. The question isn't whether success will change your life. It will. The real question is, what are you giving away in exchange for it? And just as importantly, what are you choosing to protect? Because one day, I hope you accomplish things that today seem almost impossible. But when you get there, I hope something else is waiting for you too. People who know the real you. Interests that still excite you, a curiosity that never disappeared, a life that became larger because of your success instead of smaller. Because maybe that's the real measure of success, not how high you climbed, but how much of yourself was still standing once you reached the top. Our job isn't to copy those lives. It's to notice the patterns, ask better questions, and build lives that are not only worth achieving, but still worth living once we've achieved them. If Keanu Reeves' story made you think differently about success and the person you're becoming along the way, you're going to want to check this video out next of another extraordinary person and their extraordinary story that I think you'll find just as meaningful. I'll see you there.